Before we dive into this period story, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I'd love to know what country or city my listeners are from. Let's travel to the past together. The year 1873 was drawing to a close across the vast grounds of Thornfield Manor, where the golden leaves of the English autumn danced to the rhythm of the morning wind. Lord Alexander Ashworth, heir to one of Yorkshire's most distinguished fortunes, rode through his extensive properties as he had every dawn for the past 10 years. His 28 years of life had been marked by iron discipline and the responsibilities that his noble title demanded. That October morning, however, something extraordinary was about to change the course of his destiny forever. Alexander rode his black stallion, Tempest, following the familiar path that bordered the Golden. The fresh air filled his lungs as he observed the lands he would someday inherit completely. His dark brown hair stirred in the wind, and his steel blue eyes scrutinized the horizon with the same intensity with which he managed every aspect of his life, with absolute control. But that control crumbled in an instant. In the distance, near the ancient oak that marked the boundaries of his property, an ethereal vision captured his attention. A maiden rode a chestnut horse with a grace that seemed to defy the laws of nature. Her hair, long and wavy like cascades of liquid honey, floated freely in the wind, framing a face that Alexander could not distinguish clearly, but that radiated a natural beauty that took his breath away. The unknown woman rode with a freedom he had never experienced, without a saddle, with only a blanket over the animal's back. Her simple, cream-colored dress rippled like wildflower petals, and she seemed to be part of the landscape itself, as if she were a magical creature born from the fields and wind. Alexander abruptly stopped Tempest, his heart beating with. Never in his life had he felt such impact when beholding a woman. The high society ladies he frequented in London paled in comparison to this vision of naturalness and grace. Without realizing that he was venturing into territories forbidden by the strict social norms of his class, Alexander gently spurred his horse and headed toward the mysterious rider. Helena Hartwell had found in those early hours of dawn her only moment of true freedom. At 23 years old, she worked as a seamstress in the village of Millbrook, living in a small cottage with her grandmother, Rosalind, 70 years old, and her younger sister, Margaret, 15 years old. Her father had died 3 years earlier in a mining accident, leaving them practically destitute. Her grandmother, a wise woman but of delicate health, had been her guide and protector since then. Every morning, before the village awakened, Helena secretly borrowed the local blacksmith's horse, who had been her father's dear friend. Riding through those fields was her escape from the harshness of her daily existence, the only moment when she could feel truly alive and free. That morning, lost in her thoughts about the bills she had to settle and the work that awaited her, she did not notice the elegant rider approaching until he was dangerous. When she finally looked up, her emerald green eyes met the most intense gaze she had ever beheld. The gentleman observing her from his imposing black horse possessed the unmistakable bearing of aristocracy. His riding suit was of the finest quality, his posture perfect, and his chiseled features spoke of generations of noble lineage. Helena felt the world stop. She had never been so close to someone from the upper class, much less a man who radiated such magnetism and power. Her cheeks turned crimson as she became aware of her appearance. Loose hair, simple dress, riding bareback like a wild peasant. The understanding of who this gentleman must be struck her like lightning. Lord Alexander Ashworth, the owner of all these lands, the richest and most powerful man in the region. She was trespassing on his property. With her heart racing with panic, Helena jerked the reins abruptly, trying to flee. But in her haste, she lost her balance and fell from the horse, hitting the ground with a muffled cry of pain. Alexander immediately dismounted and ran to her, his heart pounding. As he knelt beside her, he could contemplate her face clearly for the first time, and the beauty he discovered left him completely disarmed. Helena possessed delicate but expressive features, eyes the color of the purest emerald, and skin as soft as porcelain that contrasted beautifully with her golden hair. But beyond her physical beauty, there was something in her expression, a mixture of vulnerability and strength, that touched a deep fiber in Alexander's soul. "You have injured yourself. Allow me to assist you," Alexander pronounced with a voice softer than he had ever used. Helena tried to stand quickly, ignoring the sharp pain in her ankle. "I should not be here, my lord. I beg your forgiveness. It will not happen again." The painful formality in her voice and the evident fear in her eyes hurt Alexander more than he had anticipated. "Please do not flee. You are injured, and I cannot in good conscience allow you to leave in such a state. I cannot accept your kindness. It would not be proper." But Alexander had already made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Property and social rules could wait. This lady needed a and he would provide it, regardless of the consequence. 2 weeks after the encounter that had transformed his world, Alexander was heading to the village of Millbrook on business matters related to acquiring new equipment for his farms. His heart beat with the secret hope of seeing again the mysterious rider who had occupied his thoughts every day since then. Destiny, as if it had heard his deepest longings, manifested itself when Alexander spotted a familiar figure walking through the narrow cobblestone streets of the village. Elena moved gracefully among the merchants and vendors, carrying a basket with fabrics and sewing supplies. But Alexander's joy quickly transformed into alarm when he observed that 3 men of grotesque and threatening appearance were following Elena at a calculated distance. These individuals, recognizable by their dirty clothes and lascivious gazes, clearly harbored malevolent intentions. Alexander watched with growing concern as Elena quickened her pace, evidently aware that she was being pursued. The men, interpreting her nervousness as an invitation to act, approached more aggressively. In a particularly narrow and secluded street, one of the men, bolder than the others, extended his dirty hand and touched Elena's arm in a completely inappropriate manner. Elena pulled away abruptly, her voice firm but fearful. "Please, leave me alone. I have committed no fault to deserve such attention." The man laughed coarsely. "Come on, beautiful. We just want to get to know you better. Soon you'll be available to men like us anyway." Alexander could not tolerate even one more instant of such a situation. He quickly dismounted from his horse and approached the group with absolute authority. "Gentlemen, I believe the lady has clearly expressed her lack of interest in your company," Alexander declared with a voice that brooked no discussion. The 3 men turned, and upon immediately recognizing Lord Ashworth by his clothing and aristocratic bearing, they retreated with evident nervousness. "My lord, we did not know the lady was under your protection," murmured the group's leader. "Now you know. I suggest you find other more appropriate activities to occupy your time." The men quickly walked away, muttering among themselves with resentment but not daring to challenge Alexander's. Elena turned toward her savior, her green eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and surprise. "My lord, once again you come to my aid. I cannot find words to express my gratitude." Alexander studied her face carefully, noting a deeper concern than the simple shock from those men's harassment. "Elena, those individuals mentioned something strange. What did they mean by saying you would be available to them soon?" Elena lowered her gaze, her cheeks reddening with shame and fear. "My lord, a new law has been enacted by the village council, a terrible law that has filled all families with young daughters with terror." Alexander felt an icy premonition. "What kind of law?" Elena breathed deeply before continuing. "They have declared that all unmarried maidens between 18 and 25 years old, who preserve their purity, will be assigned in marriage to the older men of the village who have made significant contributions to the community." Alexander was stunned by the barbarity of such a deed. "This is medieval. How can they justify such an atrocity? They proclaim it is to ensure family stability and increase the village population. But we all know the truth," Elena added with bitterness. "It is a way for the rich and powerful men of the village to obtain young wives without courtship or consent." Alexander's mind began to process the terrible implications. According to this law, Elena, being young, single, and of good reputation, would be considered eligible to be assigned to any older man who had sufficient political or economic influence to claim her. Alexander understood something that horrified him. He himself, at 28 years old and with his considerable social position, would technically be considered eligible under this law to request any young maiden from the village. An idea began to form in his mind, an idea that could save Elena but that would also test everything he believed about honor and morality. That same night, after ensuring Elena arrived safely at her home, Alexander spent hours awake struggling with a decision that could change both their lives forever. He knew it was only a matter of time before some older and ruthless man from the village formally requested Elena under the new law. Men like Cornelius Blackwood, who had already shown obsessive interest, would have the legal authority to claim her without her consent. Alexander also understood that, given his position as the richest and most influential man in the region, any petition he presented would be immediately accepted without question. The following morning, Alexander made a decision that was morally complex but necessary. He would present a formal petition before the village council to claim Elena as his designated wife under new law. His plan was to save her from the horrible fate that awaited her with other men, but also to give her the real option to reject him once she was under his legal protection. It was an enormous risk to his reputation, but he could not bear the idea of Elena being forced to marry someone who would treat her as a possession. Alexander carefully drafted his petition, presenting it as a formal request but adding unconventional clauses that would guarantee Elena's respectful treatment and give her time to get to know him before any matrimonial ceremony. When he presented the document before the village council, the response was exactly what he had anticipated. "Lord Ashworth, it is an honor that someone of your position and contributions to our community wishes to participate in this new social initiative," declared the council president with obvious rejoicing. "Your petition is immediately approved. Miss Elena Hartwell will remain under your guardianship and protection from this moment." Alexander had saved Elena, but now he faced the even greater challenge of explaining to her what he had done and why he had done it, hoping she could understand his motivations and eventually forgive him for making such a drastic decision without her prior consent. 3 days after Alexander presented his petition, an elegant carriage stopped in front of the humble cottage where Elena resided with her grandmother Rosalind and her sister Margaret. The coachman, dressed in the Ashworth livery, delivered an official document that chilled the blood. Elena read the words with growing horror. According to the village's new law, she had been officially assigned to Lord Alexander Ashworth and must present herself at Thornfield Manor immediately to begin her new existence as his future wife. The news devastated Elena. She had not seen the gentleman who had claimed her since the incident in the village, and in her tormented mind, she began to imagine the worst. Perhaps Alexander was like other rich men who abuse their power. Perhaps she had completely misinterpreted his previous kindness. "I do not wish to leave, grandmother. I do not truly know this gentleman. What if he is cruel?" Elena whispered through tears. Her grandmother Rosalind, with the wisdom of her 70 years, took Elena's trembling hands. "Dear child, I have heard that Lord Ashworth is known for being fair with his employees. Perhaps he is not as terrible as you fear," but Elena could not be consoled. The idea of being any man's property, regardless of his reputation, filled her with terror. When she arrived at Thornfield Manor, Elena was received by the housekeeper, Mrs. Morrison, a maternal woman who immediately noticed the young woman's state of panic. "Miss Hartwell, allow me to show you your quarters. Lord Ashworth has ordered that the most beautiful room in the east wing be prepared for you." Elena followed Mrs. Morrison in silence, her legs trembling with each step. The room they showed her was more sumptuous than anything she had ever beheld in her life, walls upholstered in pale blue silk, a canopy bed adorned with velvet curtains, enormous windows overlooking the gardens, and polished mahogany furniture that gleamed under the golden light of the... "It is beautiful," Elena murmured, but her voice lacked any joy. "Lord Ashworth has ordered that you not be disturbed tonight. You may rest and adapt to your new home. Tomorrow morning you will meet with him formally." When Mrs. Morrison withdrew, Elena sat on the edge of the sumptuous bed, feeling more like a prisoner than a guest. The hours passed slowly as she contemplated her destiny. She had not even seen the face of the man who now controlled her future. Near midnight, when the manor had fallen into silence, Elena made a desperate decision. She could not simply remain there waiting to meet her captor. She needed freedom, even if only for one more night. Remembering the stables she had observed upon arriving, Elena slipped silently through the corridors until she reached the outside. Her knowledge of horses, acquired during her secret morning escapades, allowed her to quickly saddle a chestnut horse that seemed calm and reliable. Elena rode toward the darkness of the night with her heart pounding with fear and desperation. She had no specific plan. She only knew she needed to feel the wind in her hair and the sensation of freedom once more before facing her inevitable destiny. The horse, responding to her emotional urgency, galloped swiftly across the fields surrounding the manor. Elena did not realize her movements had been detected until she heard the unmistakable sound of horse hoofs behind her. Turning around, she spotted the dark silhouette of another rider following her at great speed. In the darkness of the night, she could not distinguish who it was, but immediately assumed it must be some manor employee sent to capture her and take her back to her gilded prison. Terror seized Elena. In her terrified mind, she imagined that the rider pursuing her was Lord Ashworth himself, an old, disgusting, and ruthless man coming to claim his fugitive property. Elena spurred her horse more forcefully, heading toward the thick forest she knew from her morning walks. But the chestnut, more intelligent than its terrified rider, stopped abruptly upon approaching a particularly treacherous part of the forest where tree roots and hidden holes represented mortal danger in the darkness. With no other option, Elena quickly dismounted and began running on foot through the forest. Low branches tore her dress and delicate skin. Mud from the wet ground adhered to her shoes and the bottom of her dress, but she continued running, driven by pure panic. The sound of heavy footsteps behind her confirmed that her pursuer had also dismounted and was following her on foot. Elena stumbled several times, covering herself with mud and leaves, but continued forward until finally her strength was exhausted. A strong hand grasped her arm, stopping her dead. "Please, do not harm me," Elena gasped, not daring to turn to look at her captor. But when she finally did, surprise left her speechless. The man who had captured her was not old or disgusting. He was young, tall, and despite the mud and darkness, she could see that he possessed the most beautiful eyes she had ever seen. Green eyes like emeralds that shone even in the forest's penumbra. Elena, relieved that he was not the monster she had imagined but still terrified, assumed this man must be an employee or laborer from the "Please, sir," she pleaded with tears running down her mud-stained cheeks, "do not deliver me to the filthy old man who owns this mansion. I do not know what they have promised you, but I possess nothing of value to offer you. I only beg that you allow me." The man remained in complete silence, studying her face with an expression Elena could not interpret in the darkness. Without saying a word, he gently took her arm and began guiding her back toward where they had left the horses. Elena, too exhausted to resist physically, continued pleading as they walked. "You have family, sir. A mother, a sister. Imagine if it were someone you love who was in my situation. Please, have mercy." But the mysterious man did not respond, maintaining his silence as he helped her mount her horse and escorted her back toward Thornfield. During the entire return journey, Elena cried silently, believing that this beautiful-eyed employee was taking her directly into the clutches of the ruthless lord who had acquired her as if she were merchandise. When they arrived at the mansion, Elena made one last desperate attempt. She turned toward the man who had captured her and, with all the dignity she could muster despite her muddy and desperate appearance, made a final plea. "Sir, if you possess even a hint of goodness in your heart, please do not deliver me to the filthy old man who owns this mansion. I would rather perish in this forest than live as his prisoner." The silence that followed seemed eternal, and Elena closed her eyes, preparing for the worst. It was then that the voices of the servants were heard approaching from the mansion. Mrs. Morrison appeared running with a lamp in her hand, followed by two younger maids. "Sir, you are soaked. You have been outside all night. You must change immediately or you will fall ill," exclaimed Mrs. Morrison with evident concern. Elena opened her eyes abruptly, confused by the words she had just heard. "Sir," they had called the man who had captured her, but that made no sense. Employees and laborers were not treated with such deference by the servants. The green-eyed man finally spoke, and his voice was deep, cultured, with the refined accent of aristocracy. "Go bathe. You smell terribly." The words fell upon Elena like lightning. Not only the way he had pronounced them, with the natural authority of someone accustomed to giving orders, but also the tone, which although brusque, was not cruel, it was familiar. Elena stared at him fixedly, trying to process what was happening. Then, with a barely audible voice, she whispered, "You are not an employee." The man looked directly into her eyes, and Elena saw something in his expression that filled her with a new kind of terror. It was not the cruelty she had expected, but something much more complex: weariness, concern, and something that seemed dangerously similar to care. "This filthy old man is also going to bathe," he pronounced with bitter irony that Elena did not immediately understand. Understanding hit Elena like an avalanche. The servants treated him with absolute respect. He gave orders with natural authority. He was in his mansion, not working for someone else. "No," Elena whispered, instinctively stepping back. "It cannot be true. You are—" "I am Lord Alexander Ashworth," he confirmed with a voice that mixed weariness and resignation. "And you, Elena Hartwell, have been pleading with me not to deliver you to myself." Elena felt the world collapse around her. The man she had been imagining as an old and ruthless monster was the same green-eyed gentleman who had saved her in the village, the same one who had ridden behind her not to capture her like prey, but because he was concerned for her safety in the forest's darkness. The same man who now contemplated her with an expression that combined pain, understanding, and something Elena dared not interpret. She could not believe what she was hearing. All her pleas, all her entreaties not to be delivered to the filthy old owner of the mansion, had been directed precisely at the man from whom she had been trying to escape. But even more confusing was the fact that this man, this Lord Ashworth, who supposedly had claimed her under a ruthless law, did not seem at all like the monster she had imagined. When Elena finally reached her room that night, after the maids helped her clean the mud and leaves from her hair, she sat on the edge of the canopy bed, completely overwhelmed by the contradictory emotions that invaded her. The gentleman she had imagined as an old, ruthless, and disgusting man turned out to be quite the opposite. Alexander Ashworth was not old. He could not be more than 30 years old. He was not disgusting. Even covered in mud after chasing her through the forest, there was something undeniably attractive about him. His green eyes remained etched in her memory, full of an intensity that had deeply disturbed her. But even more bewildering was the fact that he had followed her that night not with malevolent intention, but clearly concerned for her safety. A truly cruel man would have sent his employees to look for her, or simply would have waited for her to return on her own. Alexander had personally ridden in the dangerous darkness of the forest, risking his own safety. Ilona unconsciously touched the arm where he had grasped her. His hands had been firm but not brutal, protective rather than possessive, and when she had pleaded for mercy, she had seen something in his eyes that seemed to be pain. She could not reconcile the image of the monster she had created in her mind with the reality of the man she had met. Her thoughts were in complete chaos when she finally fell asleep near dawn. The following morning, Ilona was gently awakened by a maid who informed her that Lord Ashworth awaited her for breakfast in the main dining room. Ilona dressed carefully in one of the fine dresses that had been placed in her wardrobe, a pale blue dress that enhanced the color of her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she brushed her hair, not knowing what to expect from this first formal encounter. When she entered the elegant dining room, she was immediately impressed by the magnificence of the place. Enormous windows overlooking the gardens, a polished mahogany table that could easily accommodate 20 people, and crystal chandeliers that reflected the morning light. Alexander was already seated at the head of the table, impeccably dressed in a dark suit that accentuated his natural aristocratic bearing. Ilona observed, almost fascinated despite her nervousness, how he moved with an unconscious elegance that spoke of generations of refinement. Every gesture, from the way he held his teacup to the manner in which he cut his bread, radiated the natural sophistication of high society. "Good morning, Ilona," Alexander pronounced, rising courteously when she entered. Ilona made a nervous curtsy. "Good morning, my lord." Alexander indicated a chair to his right, and Ilona sat with her back rigid, her hands carefully folded in her lap. For several minutes, they ate in silence. Ilona could barely concentrate on the exquisite food before her, too conscious of the intimidating but not unpleasant presence of the gentleman seated beside her. Finally, Alexander made an almost imperceptible signal. As if by magic, all the servants silently withdrew from the dining room, leaving them completely alone. Ilona felt her heart accelerate. This was the moment she had been dreading and anticipating at the same time. Alexander turned toward her, and Ilona could contemplate up close, for the first time in daylight, how truly handsome he was. His dark brown hair was perfectly groomed, his features were aristocratic but masculine, and those green eyes that had so impacted her the previous night were even more impressive in the light of day. "Ilona," Alexander began with a carefully controlled voice, "we need to converse with absolute honesty about our situation." Ilona nodded, too nervous to speak. "First, I want you to know that although legally you are considered my promised wife under this new village law, I will not force you to anything. Not to marry me, not to share intimacy, not even to remain in this house if you truly wish to leave." Ilona looked at him with astonishment, barely able to believe what she was hearing. Alexander continued, his voice becoming softer. "What I did, claiming you under this law, I did out of compassion. I knew that other men from the village, truly ruthless and cruel men, would request you. I could not allow that to happen." Ilona finally found her voice. "But why do you care what happens to me?" Alexander looked directly into her eyes, and Ilona saw in them a vulnerability she had not expected. "Because from the moment I saw you riding freely through my fields, you have occupied my thoughts in a way I have never experienced before. Because when I saw you being harassed by those men in the village, I felt a protective need I did not know I possessed. And because the idea of someone hurting you is absolutely intolerable." Ilona felt her cheeks flush at the intensity of his confession. Alexander breathed deeply before continuing, as if the following words were the most important he would ever pronounce. "And if anything intimate should ever happen between us, Ilona, it will be only with your mutual consent. I will never take anything you do not wish to give me free. This is my word of honor, and my word is the most sacred thing I possess." The silence that followed was charged with meaning. Ilona studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or manipulation, but all she found was absolute sincerity. The way Alexander looked at her was not with the lascivious possessiveness she had feared, but with a deep respect that moved her to her soul. "My lord," Ilona whispered, her voice barely audible, "I do not know what to say. All my life I have been taught that men of power take what they desire without considering women's feelings. You are different." Alexander leaned slightly toward her, but maintained a respectful distance. Elena, I want you to know me as the man I truly am, not as the title I inherit or the position I occupy. I want to earn your respect, and if someday the heavens bless me, perhaps even your affection. But all this must happen naturally, without coercion of any kind. Elena felt something fundamental move in her heart. This gentleman was treating her not as a possession, but as a person with her own worth, with the right to choose her own destiny. The weeks that followed, that transformative conversation unfolded like a delicate courtship dance. Alexander scrupulously kept his word, treating Elena with a gentleness and respect that gradually dismantled all her defense. Every morning, Alexander invited her to ride through his lands, but this time with proper saddles and accompaniment. Elena rediscovered her love for the freedom of galloping, but now shared with someone who not only understood that passion, but celebrated it. During those morning rides, they conversed about everything: literature, philosophy, dreams, fears. Elena discovered that Alexander was not just a privileged aristocrat, but a deeply thoughtful man who genuinely cared about the welfare of the people under his care. Alexander, for his part, fell more deeply in love each day with Elena's vivacious intelligence, her natural kindness, and the inner strength she had developed facing the adversity of her existence. One December afternoon, while walking through the frost-covered winter gardens, Elena suddenly stopped and turned toward Alexander. Alexander, she pronounced with a voice charged with emotion, I want to thank you for everything you have done for me. But more than that, I want you to know that my feelings toward you have changed completely. Alexander felt his heart accelerate, but restrained himself from assuming too much. In what way have they changed? Elena approached him, her green eyes shining with an intensity he recognized but had never seen directed toward him. At first I feared you, then I respected you, now I love you. The words fell between them like rose petals on tranquil water, creating waves of emotion that expanded until they touched the depths of both souls. Alexander gently took Elena's hands in. Elena, I have been waiting to hear those words since the moment I met you, but I needed them to come from your free heart, not from obligation. I love you more than words can express. They leaned toward each other, and their lips met in a kiss that was soft, tender, and full of all the promise of a shared future. It was a kiss that sealed not only their mutual love, but also the commitment to build an existence based on respect, trust, and true devotion. That night, Elena made a decision that would change everything between them. After dinner, instead of immediately retiring to him as had been her custom, she remained in the sitting room where Alexander was reading near the fire. Alexander, she pronounced softly, there is something I want to tell you. Alexander closed his book and gave her his full attention, noticing something different in her expression, something that made his pulse quicken. Elena approached him, sitting on the sofa next to his chair. Her cheeks were flushed, but her gaze was firm and determined. During these weeks, I have come to know the man you truly are. I have seen your goodness, your honor, your respect for me, and I have come to love you not because the law obliges me to be here, but because my heart cannot imagine being anywhere else. Alexander felt his breathing deepen. Elena, I want to be truly yours, Alexander, Elena continued with a voice that trembled slightly but was clear in its determination, not by legal obligation, but by choice of the heart. I want our union to be complete, born from the mutual love we have built together. Alexander stood and knelt before her, taking her hands with a reverence that bordered on the sacred. Elena, are you completely certain? There is no hurry, no pressure. We can wait as long as you need. Elena smiled with a sweetness that illuminated her entire face. Alexander, I have waited all my life without knowing it to find a man who treats me as you treat me. I do not wish to wait any longer. That night, under the golden light of candles in Alexander's, their two souls met in the deepest union that two human beings can share. Alexander was incredibly gentle, treating Elena like the most precious treasure, ensuring that every moment was beautiful for her as Elena discovered in Alexander's arms a passion she had never imagined existed, a connection that transcended the physical and touched the spiritual. In the intimacy of that sacred night, both understood they had found something that very few people have the fortune to experience, true love in its purest and most complete form. When dawn broke, Elena awakened in Alexander's arms, feeling completely transformed. She was no longer a woman who had been assigned to a man by law, but a woman who had chosen to give her heart and soul to the man she loved more than life itself. Alexander, awakening shortly after, looked at her with an adoration that made her feel like the most treasured woman. Good morning, my love, he whispered, gently kissing her forehead. Good morning, my dear husband, Elena responded, savoring the words that now had a completely new meaning. The months that followed were like a dream come true. Alexander and Elena were officially married in an intimate ceremony in the manor's chapel, with grandmother Rosalind and Margaret as emotional. But for them, the true ceremony had been that night when they had chosen each other with complete freedom of heart. Elena flourished in her new existence, not only as the lady of the manor, but as a beloved and respected woman. Alexander taught her to handle the social aspects of her position, but always respecting her authentic nature and never asking to change who she was in essence. Together they worked to improve the living conditions of the land workers, established a school for the village children, and created programs to assist needy families. Elena found deep satisfaction in these charitable activities, knowing she was using her new position to make a real difference in other people's lives. One spring afternoon, while walking through the same fields where they had first met, Helena stopped beside the old oak that had witnessed their first encounter. "Alexander," she pronounced with a mysterious smile, "I have something wonderful to tell you." Alexander turned toward her, noticing a special gleam in her eyes that made his heart leap with anticipation. Helena took his hands and placed them on her belly, where the soft curve of a new life was just beginning to show. "We are going to have a baby, Alexander. Our love has created a new existence." Alexander felt the world stop around him. The joy that flooded his heart was so intense he could barely breathe. He took Elena in his arms and spun her around, both laughing with the pure happiness of the moment. "Elena, my love, my existence, you are the greatest blessing I could ever have dreamed of," he whispered against her ear. "And now you give us the most beautiful gift of all." As they swayed together under the old oak, with the gentle wind stirring the young spring leaves, both knew they had found something extraordinary. Their love had begun in circumstances that could have been tragic, but had blossomed into something lasting and true. Elena looked up at the man who had transformed her world, the man who had saved her not only from a terrible fate, but who had shown her the depths of true love. "Alexander," she whispered, "do you think our baby will inherit your—" Alexander laughed softly, kissing her forehead with infinite tenderness. "I hope it inherits your free spirit, your kindness, and your incredible strength. But more than anything, I hope it grows up knowing it was conceived in the purest love I have ever known." And so, under the same tree where destiny had first united their paths, Alexander and Elena silently promised each other that their child would grow up in a home full of love, respect, and the kind of devotion that can only be born when two hearts choose each other with complete freedom. Their story, which had begun with fear and uncertainty, had blossomed into a love that would be their most lasting legacy, proof that even in the most difficult circumstances, true love can triumph and create something beautiful, eternal, and worthy of being remembered forever. In the years that followed, when they would tell the story of their love to their children and grandchildren, they would always remember that the best love stories are not those that begin without obstacles, but those where two brave souls fight against adversities to create something stronger than any force that tries to separate them. And every dawn, when Elena rode through the fields of Thornfield Manor with her children by her side and Alexander waiting for her at home, she remembered that sometimes destiny comes disguised as tragedy, but that true love always finds a way to transform even the most difficult circumstances into something magical and eternal. If this story has touched your heart in any way, if you have felt Elena and Alexander's emotions as your own, if you have believed in love's power to overcome any obstacle, then understand that you too deserve a true love story. Never settle for less than what your hearts truly desire, because authentic love, like what Elena and Alexander found, is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth treasuring for all existence. If this period story touched your heart, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? If you didn't do it at the beginning, I'd love to know which scene moved you most deeply. Give it a like if you believe true love can transcend any era. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in romances that last forever. And subscribe for more stories that transport you to other eras. If you made it to the end, leave the words true love in the comments.